He left the ranch before sunrise, not because he was told to hurry, but because staying even a moment longer felt like begging. The sky was a pale bruise, purple and gray, the kind that promised cold but not comfort. Elias carried one bag, its strap worn thin, his boots crunching over frost like brittle glass. Behind him, the corral slept, unaware that a man had just been erased from their daily rhythm. No one watched him go. That, more than the firing itself, pressed hardest on his chest. He did not look back at first. He told himself it was dignity, though it felt more like fear. Fear that if he turned, he would see the horse's empty stall, or worse, see the animal still there and know he had abandoned it. Each step away was an argument with himself, his mind circling the same question he had not dared ask aloud. What good was kindness if it cost you everything? The wind answered by cutting through his jacket, sharp and unsympathetic. By mid-morning, he reached a stretch of land no one claimed anymore. An old lion shack leaned against the slope like a tired animal, roof caved in on one side, boards bleached nearly white. Elias stopped there, more out of exhaustion than choice. He sat on a rock, breathing hard, his breath fogging and disappearing as quickly as it formed. The silence was enormous. It swallowed the sound of his thoughts until only one remained, steady and insistent. The horse. He told himself he would not go back. He told himself the ranch owner had made it clear, and that returning would only deepen the wound. But by afternoon his feet were already turning downhill, carrying him along a game trail he knew by heart. He kept to the trees, moving with the quiet habit of someone long practiced at not being noticed. When the fence line came into view, his pulse quickened in spite of himself. The horse stood where Elias had last seen it, ribs still too visible, head lowered but not broken. The chain was looser now, not gone, but less cruel than before. Elias crouched behind a juniper, relief rushing through him, so fast it almost made him dizzy. He waited, watching for any sign of danger, then stepped forward, hands open, movement slow. The horse lifted its head, ears flicking, eyes finding him as if they had been searching the whole time. Elias did not speak. He knelt and set down the small bundle he had carried. Apples, a rag, a tin cup filled from the creek. The horse sniffed hesitant, then took the apple with careful teeth. Elias cleaned a wound along its shoulder, his touchlight reverent. In that narrow space between fear and trust, something shifted. He felt it in his chest, a loosening he had not realized was possible anymore. Days began to shape themselves around that hidden ritual. Elias slept in the lined shack, patching the roof with salvage boards, lighting small fires that smelled of sap and smoke. Each morning and evening he returned to the fence, always cautious, always grateful. The horse grew stronger, its coat gaining a dull shine. Elias noticed changes in himself too. His shoulders eased. He stood taller. He caught himself humming once, startled by the sound of his own voice. On the fourth evening, as the sun burned low and red, he sensed movement before he saw it. A figure stood beyond the fence, half hidden by shadow. Elias froze, heart pounding. The ranch owner's silhouette was unmistakable, hat brimmed sharp against the sky. For a moment, no one moved. The horse stepped closer to Elias, a quiet, instinctive choice. That small gesture felt louder than any accusation. The owner spoke at last, his voice flat, carrying easily across the space between them. He said the horse was leaving in the morning. He said there had been an offer, money enough to justify the inconvenience. Elias listened, his hands curling into fists at his sides. He wanted to argue, to plead, but something steadier rose instead. He straightened, meeting the man's gaze without apology. He said only that the horse was not a thing to be traded like scrap. He said it had survived worse than neglect, and that mattered. The silence that followed was heavy, expectant. The owner's eyes flicked to the horse, then back to Elias, as if seeing both for the first time. For a heartbeat, Elias thought he might be struck, or laughed at, or dismissed entirely. Instead, the owner turned away, boots crunching, his answer swallowed by distance. The promise of morning hung in the air like a blade. Elias stayed long after the light faded, his hand resting against the horse's warm neck. He felt fear, sharp and alive, but beneath it ran something stronger. Resolve. Whatever came with the dawn, he would face it standing. As he walked back toward the lion shack, stars beginning to pierce the dark, he understood that the firing had been the opening, not the end. The world had narrowed to one fragile life and one unwavering choice, and in that narrowing he felt, for the first time in years, unmistakably alive. He returned before dawn, when the land still held its breath, and even the birds seemed unwilling to speak. The path to the fence had become familiar in a way that felt older than habit, as if his body remembered it from another life. Frost glazed the grass, and each step left a brief, shining print before the cold reclaimed it. Elias moved slowly, listening for sounds that did not belong, but all he heard was his own breathing and the low rustle of wind through scrub. The horse was waiting, not in the sense of patience, but in the quiet alertness of a creature that had learned survival through attention. Its head lifted when Elias came into view, ears forward, eyes steady. There was no whinny, no restless shift, only recognition. That alone struck him harder than any display of affection could have. He stopped a few paces away, letting the space between them remain intact, honoring the fragile agreement they had formed without words. He brought better food this time, a scavenge from a neighbor's forgotten stack, grain wrapped in cloth. He set it down and stepped back, watching as the horse approached with measured care. The animal ate slowly, as if expecting interruption, and Elias felt an old anger stir, hot and useless. He pushed it down, focusing instead on the rhythm of the horse's chewing, the rise and fall of its ribs. Progress was there, subtle but undeniable. Survival was giving way to something like strength. As the light crept higher, Elias set to work. He cleaned the chain links, oiled them where they had bitten into skin, adjusted them so they no longer dragged against bone. His hands moved with the quiet competence of someone used to tending living things. When he brushed dirt from the horse's coat, the animal flinched once, then stilled, allowing the touch. Elias paused, waiting, his breath shallow. When the horse did not pull away, he continued, each stroke deliberate, respectful. Time stretched. The world narrowed to the sound of bristles against hair, to the warmth beneath his palm. Elias became aware of his own body in a way he had not been for years, of the tension he carried and the way it slowly eased. He realized he was smiling, not broadly, but enough that his face ached with the unfamiliar shape of it. The horse shifted closer, leaning just slightly into the pressure of his hand. It was not an embrace, but it felt like permission. Later, when the sun had climbed enough to cast long shadows, Elias sat with his back against the fence. He did not try to touch the horse then. He simply remained, present, letting the animal decide the distance. Minutes passed, then more. Finally, with a soft exhale that seemed to come from deep within its chest, the horse stepped forward and lowered its head until it hovered near Elias's shoulder. He did not move. He let the moment settle, afraid that any reaction might fracture it. In that stillness, memories surfaced uninvited. A smaller hand slipping from his own years ago. A promise he had not been able to keep. Elias closed his eyes, the ache sharp but cleaner than it had been before. The horse's breath warmed his neck, steady and alive, anchoring him to the present. He understood then that this bond was not about saving. It was about staying. Voices carried suddenly from the far side of the field. Elias tense, heart jumping. Two boys stood near the gate, thin jackets pulled tight, their curiosity barely contained. They had seen the horse, he realized, and the man beside it. He waited for them to speak, to ask questions, but they only watched wide-eyed. After a moment, one lifted a hand in a small, uncertain wave. Elias returned it, equally restrained. The boys whispered to each other, then ran off, laughter trailing behind them like startled birds. The intrusion left him shaken, not with fear, but with the awareness that what he was doing could no longer remain hidden. The horse seemed to sense his unease, lifting its head, eyes scanning. Elias rose and placed a hand against its neck, grounding them both. He spoke then, the first words he had offered the animal aloud. He told it that he would come back, that whatever happened, he would not disappear. His voice was rough and used, but the horse did not shy away. That night, Elias dreamed, not a loss, as he often did, but of movement, of running across open land, wind tearing at him, not in pursuit but in joy. He woke before dawn with his heart pounding, the echo of it lingering like a promise. He rose and went to fence, driven by something urgent and unnamed. The horse met him halfway. For the first time, it closed the distance without hesitation, stepping close enough that Elias felt its warmth seep through his jacket. He lifted his hand, slow, giving the animal time to refuse. It did not. His fingers brushed the coarse mane, then slid up along the curve of the neck. The horse lowered its head until it rested against Elias's chest, the weight real and trusting. Elias's breath caught. He stood there, arms trembling, as the full truth of it settled in. This was connection, hard-won and unspoken. This was the beginning of something neither of them could turn away from now. By the end of that week, the land itself seemed to notice the change before people did. Paths began to form where none had existed, pressed into grass by cautious footsteps that returned again and again. Elias sensed in the air when he woke each morning, a faint anticipation layered over the quiet. He moved through his routines with a new awareness, as though he were no longer alone even when no one else was present. The horse felt it too. Its head lifted more often toward distant sounds, not in alarm, but in watchfulness. The first to come openly was a girl, no older than 12, her hair tied back with a frayed ribbon. She stood at the fence one afternoon, hands tucked into the sleeves of an oversized coat, eyes fixed on the horse with reverence that bordered on disbelief. Elias noticed her only when the horse did, its ears swiveling toward her, body angling protectively but without threat. He waited. Eventually, the girl spoke, her voice barely louder than the wind. She asked if the horse hurt. Elias shook his head. He did not add anything else. She nodded, as if that answer had settled something important, and returned the next day with a carrot wrapped carefully in paper. Others followed in quieter ways. A man with a limp paused at a distance, leaning on the fence, his gaze distant rather than curious. He never spoke, but he came every evening at the same hour, standing there until the light faded. Elias did not ask his name. He understood that being seen without explanation was sometimes enough. The horse grew accustomed to these presences, no longer tensing at unfamiliar shapes. It stood calmly, an anchor, its steady breathing setting the pace for the space around it. Children began to appear in pairs and small groups, drawn by something they could not have named. They sat on rocks, whispered, laughed softly, then fell into thoughtful silence. Elias watched them from the corner of his eye. Careful not to intrude, he continued his work, mending boards, clearing brush, moving with a purpose that felt newly shared. Each small task seemed to echo outward, as if the land itself were responding to the attention. One evening, as the sky burned orange and gold, Elias noticed a man with a limp had stepped closer than usual. He stood near the horse, his hand hovering uncertainly. Elias caught his eye and gave a single nod. The man hesitated, then rested his palm against the horse's shoulder. His breath shuddered, sharp and involuntary, as if something long locked away had cracked open. He pulled his hand back quickly, embarrassed, but his eyes were wet. He left without a word, shoulders a fraction lighter than when he had arrived. That was the moment Elias understood. This was no longer about rescue. It was about permission. The horse did not demand anything from those who came. It did not flinch at their broken edges. It simply stood, present, offering its warmth and weight as proof that trust could exist without explanation. Elias felt a deep, quiet humility settle over him. He had thought himself the caretaker, the giver. Instead, he was a witness. The ranch owner's shadow lingered at the edges of his thoughts, but no longer dominated them. Elias knew the morning threat had not vanished. The horse could still be taken. This fragile sanctuary could still be undone. Yet the fear had changed shape. It no longer hollowed him out. It sharpened his resolve. He began reinforcing the old fence, not to keep people out, but to mark a boundary worth respecting. He salvaged wood, straightened posts, worked until his hands ached. Each repair felt like a declaration. On the seventh night, a storm rolled in without warning. Thunder cracked close enough to rattle the shack, rain slashing sideways. Elias ran for the fence, heart hammering, calling softly. The horse was already moving toward him, eyes wide but trusting. Elias led it to the shelter of the trees, standing between it and the worst of the wind. Lightning split the sky, illuminating them both in stark white. In that instant, Elias felt the full weight of what he was protecting and why. When the storm passed, the air smelled clean, almost new. Elias leaned against the horse, soaked and shaking, laughter bubbling up unexpectedly. The horse nudged him, a gentle insistence, and he laughed harder, the sound raw and unpolished. In the distance, lights flickered on in nearby houses. People had seen the storm. They would see what followed. As Elias walked back toward the shack, the horse beside him, he felt it clearly for the first time. This place was no longer temporary. Something had taken root, fragile but real. He did not yet know what it would become, or how fiercely it would be tested. He only knew that the quiet gathering of wounded souls had begun, and that none of them, himself included, would leave unchanged. The idea arrived without ceremony, not as a vision or a plan, but as a pressure that refused to leave him alone. Elias felt it most clearly in the early mornings, when the land was still and honest, when the horse stood beside him and the day had not yet made its demands. He would look at the uneven ground, the broken fence, the leaning shack, and feel a strange certainty rising beneath the doubt. This place was asking for something, and, against his better judgment, he realized he was answering. He began small, because small was all he trusted. He cleared a wider space near the trees, removing stones one by one, stacking them carefully as if they might be needed again. He repaired the shack's door so it closed properly, then added a second chair inside, though he lived there alone. The act felt foolish at first, almost superstitious, but he left it there. When he finished, he sat in it for a long time, listening to the wind press against the walls, imagining another presence without daring to define it. The horse watched him constantly now, not with dependence, but with a quiet attentiveness that mirrored his own. It followed at a respectful distance, stopping when he stopped, moving when he moved. Elias caught himself glancing back to check on it, the way one might check on a partner rather than an animal. That realization unsettled him. He had spent years convincing himself that attachment only ended one way. Yet here it was, growing anyway, unbothered by his caution. People came more frequently. Not all of them crossed the fence, but they lingered, drawn by the same unspoken invitation. A mother stood with her hands on her son's shoulders, both of them silent, watching the horse as if it were something sacred. A teenage boy helped Elias carry water without being asked, his eyes fixed on the ground, his movements careful. They did not stay long. None of them did, but they returned. That, Elias understood, was the difference. One afternoon, the man with the limp spoke for the first time. He asked Elias how long the horse had been there. Elias answered honestly. He said he did not know how long it would remain. The man nodded, as if that uncertainty was the only thing he trusted. Before leaving, he placed a bundle of old nails on the shack step, rusty but usable. Elias stared at them long after the man was gone, the weight of that quiet contribution settling deeper than gratitude. At night, doubt crept in. Elias lay awake listening for engines, for footsteps that did not belong. He imagined the ranch owner returning with paperwork, authority, finality. He rehearsed arguments he knew he would not make. What steadied him was not confidence, but memory. The way the horse had leaned into his chest. The way the girl's face had softened when she saw it breathe easily. These moments had stitched something back together inside him. He could not unlearn that. The confrontation came at dusk, when the light was low and deceptive. A truck stopped at the edge of the field, its engine idling. Elias stood, heart pounding, the horse shifting closer, alert. The ranch owner stepped out, his expression unreadable. He surveyed the fence, the cleared ground, the people standing nearby who had not yet noticed him. For a long moment, he said nothing. Elias felt the old instinct to shrink rise in him, sharp and familiar. He resisted it. He did not speak first. He placed a hand on the horse's neck, steadying himself as much as the animal. When the owner finally spoke, his voice was measured, almost curious. He asked what Elias thought he was doing. The question hung between them, heavier than any accusation. Elias answered with the truth, because it was all he had left. He said he was giving the horse space to heal. He said people had found something here they could not find elsewhere. He said he did not know what would become, only that it mattered. His voice did not rise. He did not plead. He stood, shoulders squared, prepared for whatever came next. The owner looked past him then, at the small group gathered near the fence, at the boy holding a bucket, at the girl clutching her ribbon, at the man with the limp standing a little straighter than before. Something flickered across the owner's face, gone as quickly as it appeared. He said nothing more. He turned, got back into his truck, and drove away without promise or threat. The engine noise faded, leaving behind a silence that felt charged rather than empty. Elias exhaled slowly, only then realizing how tightly he had been holding himself together. The horse nudged him, a simple, grounding gesture. Elias rested his forehead against its mane, eyes closed, letting the moment pass through him. When he looked up, the people were watching him, not with expectation, but with a tentative hope that frightened him more than fear ever had. He understood then that he could no longer pretend this was temporary. Whatever this place was becoming, it would require him fully. The realization did not feel like a burden. It felt like purpose, fragile and demanding, finally asking to be claimed. By the time winter loosened its grip, the land no longer looked forgotten. Paths had hardened into intention, pressed firm by many feet that came and went without announcement. The fence stood straighter. The shack breathed with a different sound, warmed by use, its door opening more often than it closed. Elias noticed the change way one notices healing in the mirror, only after it has already begun. Mornings arrived with purpose. He woke to the soft thud of hooves outside, to voices carried on cold air, to the kettle whistling before he remembered setting it on. People arrived in ones and twos, never all at once, as if the place demanded restraint. A woman with shaking hands learned to brush the horse's coat until her breathing slowed. A boy who flinched at sudden noise learned the weight of reins, the steady rhythm of another heart beneath him. No one was asked why they came. No one was asked to stay. Elias moved among them quietly, fixing what needed fixing, offering what he could without instruction. He spoke less than he listened. When words did come, they were simple, grounded, shaped by action rather than promise. He noticed how his own reflection had changed in the cracked mirror by the door. His eyes held light again, not the sharp kind, but something deeper, earned. He stood differently, as if his spine had remembered its original purpose. The horse had grown powerful, its scars fading into stories only Elias still read. It walked the land as if it belonged, not in ownership, but in guardianship. When storms came, it stood calm. When newcomers hesitated, it waited. Elias often found himself watching the animal instead of the horizon, trusting its instincts more than his own. One afternoon, without warning, the horse did not return at dusk. The light drained from the sky, and unease crept in, cold and familiar. Elias searched the perimeter, calling softly, his voice steady though his heart was not. Night fell unanswered. He slept little, listening for a sound that did not come. At dawn, dust rose along the ridge. Elias stepped outside, squinting into the pale light, and saw movement cresting the hill. The horse emerged first, head high, mane lifted by the wind. Behind it came others, figures on foot, on horseback, walking together in loose formation. People Elias recognized, people he did not. They moved not like a crowd, but like something called back to life. Elias stood rooted as they approached, the ground humming beneath his boots. Understanding struck him with quiet force. What had been built here no longer depended on him alone. The horse had not vanished. It had gathered what belonged. The horse did not come to him immediately. It paused at the edge of the field, nostrils flaring, as if sending a boundary Elias could not see. The people behind it slowed, instinctively giving space, their movement quiet, reverent. Elias felt something tighten in his chest, a reflex born of old fear. He had learned, painfully, that arrivals could be temporary, that even the most meaningful connections sometimes turned away without warning. He took a step forward, then stopped. He did not call out. Whatever this was, it had to choose him back. The horse lowered its head and walked the rest of the distance alone. When it reached Elias, it did not press close as it once had. Instead, It stood squarely in front of him, eyes steady, breathing slow. Elias searched its face for injury, for strain, for signs of harm that might explain the night's absence. He found none. What he saw instead unsettled him more deeply. Confidence, not the brittle kind born of dominance, but something calm and assured, as if the animal carried news too large for urgency. Only then did Elias look past it. The people were not random. They formed a loose arc, familiar faces scattered among strangers. The boy who had learned to ride stood taller now. His hands relaxed at his sides. The woman with shaking hands held him still against her coat, her breath even. The man with the limp leaned on his cane, but his posture was straight, his eyes clear. Others stood with him, older men, young women, teenagers whose expressions carried the wary hope of those who had been disappointed before, but returned anyway. No one spoke. The silence was not empty. It felt intentional, as though they were waiting for Elias to understand something that words would only cheapen. A memory surfaced uninvited. The night he had stood alone with the horse under lightning-split sky, promising not to disappear. He realized now that the promise had never been one-sided. The horse had heard it, accepted it, and carried it outward, translating it into something others could recognize. Trust had traveled where Elias could not. His legs weakened. He steadied himself with a hand against the horse's shoulder, feeling the familiar warmth anchor him. The animal turned its head slightly, acknowledging the touch, then faced forward again, placing itself between Elias and the gathering, not in defense, but in declaration. This was where it belonged. This was where they all belonged. A child stepped forward, then another. They crossed the field slowly, stopping when the horse shifted its weight, proceeding when it stilled. The movement rippled outward until the space filled, not with noise, but with presence. Elias felt it then, unmistakably. The thing he had feared losing had outgrown fear itself. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the weight of it wash through him. When he opened them, the horizon looked different, wider, alive. And for the first time since he had been fired and forced into the unknown, Elias understood that the night of absence had not been a loss. It had been an invitation, carried on 4 steady legs, answered by an army that did not march, but arrived. The change did not arrive as a celebration. There were no raised voices, no sudden rush forward. What unfolded instead was a sequence of small, unmistakable proofs, each one quiet enough to be missed if you were not paying attention. Elias watched as the boy who once clutched the reins in terror stepped closer to the horse, without looking for permission. He placed a hand on its neck, steady, sure. The horse did not flinch. It shifted its weight to accommodate him, an unspoken agreement made visible. Nearby, the woman who had once struggled to still her hands removed her gloves. She pressed her palms together, then let them fall to her sides. Her shoulders lowered as if she had been holding them up for years. No one commented. No one needed to. The relief moved through the group like a breath released all at once, subtle but shared. Elias felt himself recede, not pushed aside, but gently repositioned. He was no longer the center of what was happening. He was the ground it stood on. The realization startled him. He had spent so long measuring his worth by what he could do alone that he had not recognized the deeper work of holding space for others to arrive whole or broken, unchanged or transformed. The horse moved again, slow and deliberate, walking toward the far side of the field. Without instruction, people followed at a distance that respected its lead. Elias watched them go, his chest tight with something close to disbelief. This was not control. This was trust in motion. The animal stopped near the trees, lowering its head, breathing deeply. One by one, people sat in the grass, some with eyes closed, some watching the way light filtered through bare branches. A sound rose then, so soft Elias almost missed it. A man's breath, deep and even, slipping into sleep where sleep had not come easily before. Nearby, a teenager leaned back on her hands, eyes lifted to the sky, her jaw unclenched. These were not miracles that announced themselves. They were quieter, more dangerous in their permanence. Elias remained standing at the edge, unsure where he belonged now that the shape of things had shifted. The horse turned his head and looked at him, not beckoning, simply noticing. Elias understood. He walked forward and sat on the ground, back against the familiar curve of his flank. The warmth seeped into him, grounding, present. For the first time, he did not feel responsible for the outcome. He felt allowed to be part of it. As the light changed, Elias thought of the moment he had been fired. The way his life had seemed to narrow to a single mistake. He saw now how wrong that measure had been. What looked like an ending had been a clearing. What felt like loss had made room for something that required open hands rather than clenched ones. The ranch owner did not return that day, nor the next. When word reached Elias later that the horse's sale had quietly fallen through, he felt no triumph, only relief, and a deeper understanding that some things endure not because they are protected by authority, but because they are chosen again and again by those who need them. As dusk settled, people began to leave in the same unhurried way they had arrived. They did not say goodbye so much as see you. The field emptied, but it did not feel abandoned. The horse remained beside Elias, its breathing slow, its presence vast. Elias rested his hand against its neck, fingers splayed, and let himself be still. He did not know what tomorrow would demand of him. He only knew that this place and the lives moving through it had answered a question he had carried for years without words. Purpose was not found in being needed. It was found in being willing to stay. The morning the boy spoke, no one noticed at first. The light was thin and pale, the kind that made everything look unfinished, as if the day itself were still deciding whether to stay. Elias was repairing a loose board near the fence, his hands moving from habit more than thought. The horse stood nearby, calm, its presence as steady as breath. People were scattered across the field in small, quiet constellations, each absorbed in their own fragile work of becoming. The boy sat on the ground beneath the tree line, knees pulled to his chest. He had come many times before, always silent, his eyes tracking movement with an intensity that suggested sound was too much to manage. Elias had learned not to fill that silence. He had learned that some things required waiting without expectation. The horse wandered closer to the boy, lowering its head, standing within reach but not demanding it. The boy's fingers twitched. Elias felt it before he saw it. A subtle shift in the air, the way stillness tightens just before it breaks. The boy reached out and touched the horse's mane, not tentatively, but with a certainty that startled everyone who witnessed it. His hand remained there, gripping gently, as if anchoring himself to something real. The horse did not move. It breathed, slow and deep, its warmth a constant. Then the boy's lips parted. The sound that came out was not loud. It barely carried beyond the space between his knees and the horse's shoulder. But it was unmistakable. A single word, rough with disuse, shaped carefully as if it mattered more than anything else he had ever tried to say. The horse's name, spoken like a truth being tested against the world. No one rushed him. No one reacted in ways that might fracture the moment. Elias froze where he stood, the board slipping from his hands. His breath caught halfway in. He watched the boy's face, the way his eyes widened, not with fear, but with surprise at himself. The boy swallowed and spoke again, the word clearer this time, stronger, real. The horse shifted its weight and lowered its head further, pressing its forehead gently against the boy's. The contact was deliberate, grounding. The boy laughed then, a sound so sudden and unguarded it seemed to echo. It was not joy unburdened by pain. It was joy that had survived it. Elias felt his knees weaken. He sat heavily on the ground, his vision blurring. He had imagined moments like this in abstract ways, allowed himself small hopes he quickly dismissed. But witnessing it unfolded in real time, unscripted and irreversible, broke something open inside him. This was not healing as metaphor. This was healing with consequence. Others felt it too. The man with the limp closed his eyes and leaned back against a tree, his breathing deepening as if sleep had finally found him in daylight. A woman pressed a hand to her mouth, her shoulders shaking silently. A teenage girl mounted the horse later that afternoon, her balance unsure but improving with every step. Her laughter carried on the wind like something newly earned. Elias watched it all with a strange calm. The frantic need to manage outcomes had left him. He understood now that what he had built was not a solution, but a threshold. People crossed it when they were ready. The horse was a constant, The living proof that gentleness could hold weight, that strength could exist without force. As the sun lowered, Elias stood alone with the horse near the fence. The field behind him was quiet again, marked only by footprints that would fade by morning. He rested his forehead against the animal's neck, eyes closed. He did not thank it. Gratitude felt too small a word. Instead, he stayed. He had once believed purpose would arrive with clarity, with certainty, with a sense of being chosen. Now he knew better. Purpose arrived when he stopped leaving. It settled in the act of showing up, of remaining open even when it hurt, of trusting that what grew slowly often endured. The horse breathed beside him, solid and alive. Elias opened his eyes to the darkening sky and felt no fear of what came next. The miracle had already happened, not because lives were changed, but because they were allowed to be. If the story moved you, don't let it end here. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us. More healing stories are waiting.